Where do you think you're going in that discount outfit? I asked you a question. Did you not hear me? Or do you not understand English? I asked where you think you're going in that discount outfit. The entrance for service staff is behind the kitchen, through the service hallway. This area is for people who actually contribute to the city budget. I need to speak with Mr. Vance. For what? To ask for a housekeeping job at this hotel? Or did you come here to pick up leftovers from the banquet tables? Where is your invitation? Show me the ticket that allows someone like you to come anywhere near the Hargrove family VIP area. My ticket is completely valid, Miss Hargrove. And I suggest you take your hand off my shoulder. Look what we have here. Fund records? Where did you get these? Are you a spy from some TV station or just a cheap blackmailing bitch? Get out of here before I call the police and have people like you thrown in jail. Let's see if anyone in this city of Atlanta dares stand up for a nobody bish like you against the Hargrove family. You just triggered the Federal Emergency Intervention Protocol with your own hand, Miss Hargrove. Thank you for that slap.
The violin music from the city's famous symphony orchestra flowed steadily through the room, blending with the familiar low murmur of the upper class. It was a programmed kind of noise, where diplomatic smiles were shaped to the perfect angle and handshakes carried the scent of money and political power. The Millennium Hotel in Buckhead, the wealthiest mansion district of Atlanta, was wrapped tonight in glittering golden light reflected from bohemian crystal chandeliers hanging along the ceiling of the grand reception hall. People did not come here only to donate. They came to be seen, to confirm their place on the social ladder. Camille Brooks stood in a hidden corner near the gray marble columns, her long, slender hands folded around a glass of plain water. Condensation gathered on the outside of the cold glass, soaking through her skin and keeping her mind clear in the choking cloud of expensive perfume. The plain black dress she wore was clean and proper, but it lacked the sharp structure of the custom-made gowns from fashion houses in Milan or Paris drifting through the party hall. She wore no necklace, no diamond ring, and carried no glittering stone-covered handbag. Camille's black eyes, deep and still, were not focused on the main stage where auction paintings were being displayed. They were locked on one point only, the entrance to the mayor's private reception room. There, special guests were welcomed by two security guards in black suits embroidered with the city emblem. The only thing that allowed them through the thick oak door was a yellow wristband made of high-grade polymer with a hidden number code. Each time a politician or real estate CEO held out a wrist, the laser from the guard's handheld scanner gave a short, clean beep full of privilege. Behind that door was where the real deals were signed, completely separate from the noisy crowd outside. Camille took a small sip of water. The cold air slid down her throat, forcing her back to the dry numbers resting silently in her memory. 3 weeks earlier, inside a small, windowless office in the basement of the State Attorney General's building, Camille had spent 72 straight hours with a computer and 3 sealed boxes of confidential audit files. The files belonged to the charity fund Urban Embrace, the main organizer of tonight's gala. In the media, the fund was a paradise of compassion, where Mayor Charles Hargrove often appeared with rolled-up shirt sleeves, hugging black children in poor neighborhoods of South Atlanta and promising them a brighter future. The brochure for the evening clearly stated, all donations raised tonight would be used to build 3 support centers and provide free meals for the homeless. But the money trail Camille followed through the audit documents told a completely different story. The $4.2 million donated by major construction corporations since the beginning of the year had never left Buckhead for the south side of the city. Camille had carefully broken down each transaction, from labeled payments to strategic consulting firms that had only existed for a few months to fake property rental contracts at outrageous prices. All of those shell companies led back to one name, Charles Hargrove's re-election committee. Every dollar that should have become bricks, roofs, and shelter for people curled under bridges on cold Atlanta nights had been turned into polished campaign commercials and quiet payments to political electors. Camille's mission tonight was not to carry out a noisy arrest. She still did not have enough verified signatures on the international transfer orders. The person holding the final key to open this Pandora's box was Marcus Vance, the chief accountant of the Urban Embrace Fund. Vance was not a politician. He was only an employee caught inside the machinery of power. Over the past week, through legal surveillance tools, the Attorney General's office had noticed that Vance was no longer sleeping. He had started withdrawing cash from his personal accounts and searching for lawyers who specialized in whistleblower protection. Vance was scared. He knew the Hargrove ship was heading toward a cliff, and he did not want to be the one still in the cockpit when it exploded. Camille saw Vance. He stood about 10 meters away from her beside the buffet table, where trays of fresh oysters and caviar were displayed. Vance looked thinner than he did in the case photos. His silk tie was slightly crooked, and his right hand kept turning an empty champagne glass. For a few minutes, Vance glanced toward the VIP hallway where Mayor Hargrove had just entered with major donors. Anxiety showed in every muscle on his face. This was the best moment. Camille needed to reach Vance before he changed his mind or before the mayor's people isolated him inside the private area. She set the glass down on a small wooden table beside the columns and lightly smoothed the front of her black dress. Inside her small, rough leather purse, the Justice Department's specialized digital recorder was already on, its tiny green signal light hidden behind the lining. She only needed Vance to confirm one thing, the existence of the Cayman Islands bank account she had found inside the hidden data file. Camille began walking. She moved slowly, slipping between groups of guests discussing the stock market and new real estate projects downtown. No one paid attention to her. In a room filled with tailored tuxedos and evening gowns covered in sequins that caught the light, a simply dressed black woman like her was like an invisible ghost. Someone the upper class automatically filtered out of their vision so the beauty of their experience remained perfect. Camille used that. Invisibility was always a financial investigator's best weapon. The distance narrowed. 8 meters. 5 meters. Vance had just refused a drink offered by an acquaintance. He stepped backward toward a small passage leading to the VIP restroom, a perfect spot, quiet and away from the main hall security cameras. Camille increased her pace slightly, keeping her breathing steady. She had already prepared her opening line, a code phrase only people inside the audit would understand. Mr. Vance, I have a few questions about invoice number 904 from Indigo Consulting. But when Camille was only 3 steps away from the turn into the VIP hallway, a figure suddenly cut across her path. The heavy scent of black rose and sandalwood, an expensive limited production perfume, rushed straight into Camille's nose, followed by the sharp tapping of high heels striking the marble floor. A hand with 5 slender fingers, the nails painted dark red like dried blood, reached out and pressed hard against Camille's shoulder, forcing her to stop immediately. The pressure was not strong enough to hurt, but it was full of arrogance and dismissal. Camille lifted her eyes. Standing in front of her was Victoria Hargrove. The daughter of Mayor Charles Hargrove appeared like the queen of the evening. She wore a glittering silver mermaid gown that hugged her slim body. Around her proud high neck was a diamond necklace worth as much as an apartment on the edge of the city. Victoria's pale blue eyes looked Camille up and down, a cold, inspecting gaze full of contempt hidden behind a fake half-smile. The 2 close friends walking with Victoria also stopped at once and folded their arms on either side of her like an invisible protective fence. They looked at Camille as if they were staring at a stain that had suddenly appeared on an expensive velvet carpet. "Where do you think you're going in that discount outfit?" Victoria's voice rang out, sharp and high enough to cut through the rising and falling violin music and make several nearby guests turn their heads. Camille did not step back. She lowered her eyes to Victoria's hand still resting on her shoulder, then slowly looked up into the young Hargrove woman's eyes. Camille's silence was not fear, it was information gathering. In her mind, the data on Victoria appeared instantly. 24 years old, graduate of an expensive art school in Europe paid for with fund sponsorship money, currently holding the honorary title of Creative Director for the Urban Embrace Fund, a position with no real power but a 6-figure salary paid from public donations. "I'm heading toward the hallway," Camille answered, her voice low, clear, and completely free of panic. She used polite and formal language, keeping the proper distance of a citizen speaking to a member of the organizing committee. "I need to speak with Mr. Vance." Victoria laughed, a sound filled with mockery. She turned to her 2 friends as if asking them to confirm the joke. "Did you hear that?" "She needs to speak with my father's accountant." Victoria turned back and stepped closer, close enough for Camille to see the thick foundation on her beautiful but stiff face. "For what?" "To ask for a housekeeping job at this hotel? Or did you come here to pick up leftovers from the banquet tables?" Victoria's insults made no attempt to hide her class prejudice and deep bias. The white guests around them began spreading out, forming a small circle. Not one person stepped forward to intervene. Powerful marksmen in tuxedos suddenly became very interested in their wine glasses, while elegant women whispered behind feather fans. In their world, the mayor's daughter disciplining a nobody was something obvious, and defending someone out of place like Camille was political suicide. Inside the VIP hallway, Marcus Vance heard the noise. He leaned his head out, and his eyes met Camille's. But the moment he saw Victoria and the city emblem badge shining on the chest of the security guard approaching, Vance's face showed clear fear. He looked at Camille with pleading eyes, then turned and hurried deeper into the restricted area, disappearing behind the oak door. Camille's chance to reach Vance tonight had closed. but the conflict in front of her was only escalating. "Where is your invitation?" Victoria held out her hand, her voice full of command. "Show me the ticket that allows someone like you to come anywhere near the Hargrove family VIP area." Camille stood straight. Her shoulders did not drop. Her left cheek twitched slightly when she noticed that her purse was within Victoria's reach. This battle was no longer a secret investigation. It had become a direct confrontation between a rotten power system and a representative of truth hiding under the appearance of someone weak. "My ticket is completely valid, Miss Hargrove," Camille said, her eyes locked on Victoria's arrogant stare. "And I suggest you take your hand off my shoulder." Victoria narrowed her eyes, and the smile on her lips disappeared completely. In its place was the anger of someone used to ruling when a person she considered beneath her dared challenge her in front of a crowd. The air in the reception hall seemed to freeze, while the violin music kept playing mindlessly from the luxury stage. The light from the huge crystal chandelier above fell down, creating glittering halos across Victoria Hargrove's bare shoulders. She still stood there, her 5 dark red nails pressed firmly into the wool fabric of Camille's black dress. The weight of that hand was not simply physical pressure. It was the expression of inherited privilege, a kind of power fed by a mayor's last name and bank accounts that never ran dry. Victoria's 2 friends, a blonde in an emerald green silk dress named Chloe and another girl with tan skin named Harper, moved half a step closer, tightened the circle around Camille as if declaring ownership over the space. Victoria did not hurry to remove her hand. She lowered her head slightly, showing the diamond necklace sparkling under the lights, while her pale blue eyes swept over Camille's face with curiosity mixed with ridicule. She looked at Camille's dark skin, at her black hair simply with an unbranded plastic clip, then lingered for a long time on the tiny silver earrings, the kind of jewelry that could be bought at any Target outside the city. "I asked you a question. Did you not hear me?" Victoria raised her voice, stretching out her words on purpose, using the tone wealthy people in Buckhead often used with drivers or delivery workers. "Or do you not understand English? I asked where you think you're going in that discount outfit. The entrance for service staff is behind the kitchen, through the service hallway. This area is for people who actually contribute to the city budget." Chloe covered her mouth and laughed softly, her laugh clicking like ice cubes against a glass. "Maybe she came with someone, Victoria. You know, one of those leftover tickets they hand out to community organizations from the South Side. Your dad always has to throw a few low-income people into the room to make the media file look good. Even leftover tickets should have limits," Harper added, turning the yellow polymer VIP wristband around her wrist with one finger. "At least they should know how to dress so they don't ruin the group photos. Look at that dress. That synthetic fabric is definitely going to catch the flash badly." Camille stood still. She could feel the warm breath of Victoria's expensive perfume, and she could feel dozens of eyes from the nearby tables turning toward them. The clink of knives and forks against porcelain plates, and the lively talk in the grand hall seemed to fade, giving way to a thickening tension surrounding the 4 women. Inside Camille's mind, an invisible clock was counting down. Marcus Vance had just entered the VIP hallway. Every second she wasted here with these arrogant young women was a second Vance could escape or find another way to avoid the legal conversation. But Camille did not allow herself to show any hurry. She understood very well the psychology of people like Victoria. They craved a reaction. They wanted panic, insecurity, or a weak plea so they could play the role of superior people granting mercy. Camille slowly breathed out through her nose, keeping her heartbeat at a normal level. She raised her hand, gripped Victoria's wrist, and removed it from her shoulder with firm control, but without violence. "Miss Hargrove," Camille said, her voice still as the surface of a windless lake. Each word was clear without the slightest tone of anger. "I am a legal guest at tonight's gala. I have a ticket registered in the system, and I am moving through a public hotel space that I paid to enter. Your comments about my clothing and my skin color are not only rude, they are also interfering with my freedom of movement." Victoria stared at the wrist Camille had just moved away. A flash of surprise crossed her face, then it turned red beneath her expensive foundation. Camille's calmness was like cold water thrown straight onto the overprotected pride of the mayor's daughter. In Atlanta, no one, especially not a plainly dressed black woman, had ever dared use the tone of an equal to warn her about courtesy. Freedom of movement? Victoria stepped closer until there were less than 10 centimeters between them. "Let me tell you something, girl. This hotel, this ballroom, and even the charity fund you're trying to cling to in order to get in here, all of it runs under my father's name. You say you're a legal guest? Let me see how much that legality is worth." Victoria spun around, stamped her heel hard against the floor, and signaled toward the security desk nearby. "Miller, get over here right now." From the VIP hallway corner, a middle-aged white man with a heavy build wearing the hotel security team's black suit quickly walked over. The brass nameplate on his chest read Miller Security Supervisor and moved with his hurried steps. Miller had worked at the Millennium Hotel long enough to know who paid his salary, and more importantly, who could make him lose his job with one phone call on Monday morning. When he saw Victoria Hargrove standing there with an angry face, Miller immediately adjusted his posture, folded his hands in front of him, and lowered his head with respect. "What seems to be the issue, Miss Hargrove? How may I help you?" Miller's voice was low and eager. "Miller, has your hotel security become so loose that anyone can sneak into the mayor's VIP area now?" Victoria pointed her dark red fingernail directly at Camille's face. "This woman does not have a yellow wristband. She keeps hovering around the entrance to the private reception room and trying to approach officials. I suspect she is not a legal guest, or at least she is here to cause trouble. Check her immediately." Miller turned to look at Camille. The middle-aged man's face twitched slightly as he examined her plain black dress and old rough leather purse. His eyes held the quick, systematic assessment that Buckhead security employees applied every day, sorting people by clothing labels and the power of the car they arrived in. To Miller, Camille Brooks showed no sign of power or money. She had no Chanel bag, no bodyguard beside her, and most importantly, she had the skin of people who usually worked in the back areas, not people seated at the honor tables. "Mom." Miller stepped forward, his voice shifting into a cold professional tone without a trace of respect. He stood between Camille and the entrance to the VIP hallway. "I need to see your ticket and identification. Please cooperate." Camille did not hurry. She opened her leather purse and took out a white card printed with the Urban Embrace logo. It was a general admission ticket, the kind given to minimum-level donors or handed out through diplomatic seats from smaller partners. The ticket did not have the gold foil stamping of Victoria's VIP ticket, but it had a complete barcode and the raised seal of the organizing committee. Camille held the ticket out to Miller. "This is my ticket. Serial number 0412. It was scanned at the main security entrance on the first floor lobby 15 minutes ago. You can check it in the system." Miller took the ticket and turned it over under the light. He knew it was real. The hotel's barcode system could not be faked, but just as he was about to nod, a small throat-clearing sound from Victoria stopped his finger. Victoria folded her arms over her chest, her blue eyes narrowed with meaning. "Miller, that ticket is only general admission for the outer hall. She is standing in the hallway leading to the VIP reception room. According to tonight's organizer rules, anyone without a yellow polymer wristband is not allowed in this area after 8 p.m. My father is having a closed meeting inside with strategic donors. If anything happens, do you think your security supervisor position will still exist tomorrow?" Victoria's words were a direct threat wrapped in the language of administrative rules. Miller understood the game perfectly. Camille's ticket might be technically legal, but the mayor's power was practically legal. On an evening when Charles Hargrove was the center of all attention, his daughter's satisfaction was worth more than 10 general admission tickets held by an unknown woman. Miller returned the ticket to Camille, his face blank. "Mom, Miss Hargrove is correct. This hallway area is currently restricted to VIP guests. Your ticket only allows you to remain in the main banquet hall and central stage area. I must ask you to leave this area immediately so you do not affect the privacy of the actual guests." "Actual guests?" Camille repeated the phrase, the corner of her mouth lifting by the smallest amount a cold smile. "Mr. Miller, I believe the hotel rental contract and the gala regulations contain no clause that divides invited guests into actual and not actual based on where they happen to be standing in a side hallway. I am only standing here. I am not debating with you, Mom." Miller stepped forward, using his large body to apply physical pressure and force Camille backward toward the main hall. "If you do not move voluntarily, I will have to use security measures and cancel your admission privileges. Move now." The system of injustice was operating smoothly right in front of Camille's eyes. The hotel security staff and invisible rules automatically bent themselves to protect an arrogant young woman. At that exact moment, the thick oak door to the VIP reception room opened again. Marcus Vance stepped out. The chief accountant of Urban Embrace looked even more miserable under the direct hallway lights. Sweat covered his forehead, and he kept wiping his palms with a white handkerchief. Vance walked unsteadily, as if searching for open air after the choking pressure inside the closed room with the mayor. Seeing Vance sent a current of electricity up Camille's spine. This was the only chance. If Miller pushed her into the main hall, she would lose Vance completely tonight, and the investigation could be delayed by weeks, enough time for Charles Hargrove to move the entire $4.2 million into offshore accounts. Camille ignored Miller. She leaned slightly to one side, looked straight over the security guard's shoulder, and called out loudly. Her voice rang through the hall, breaking the grip of the surrounding tension. "Mr. Vance! Marcus Vance!" Camille's call startled Marcus Vance. The handkerchief in his hand nearly fell to the floor. Vance turned, his tired eyes with dark circles searching for the voice, then stopping on Camille's face. For one short moment, less than 2 seconds, recognition appeared in Vance's eyes. He knew her. Maybe he had seen her name on the audit explanation request sent to his office the week before. Or maybe he recognized the investigator badge she had used in indirect meetings. Vance's lips moved and he took one step forward. His knees shook slightly, as if the instinct of a man standing at the edge of a cliff was pushing him toward a life raft. "I need to talk to you about Indigo, Mr. Vance." Camille pressed on, each word like an arrow striking straight into the accountant's fear, but that hope only lasted a blink. From the far end of the VIP hallway, the door to the main reception room opened wider again. Mayor Charles Hargrove stepped out, holding a glass of wine in one hand while his other arm rested around the shoulder of a major real estate donor. The polished, booming laugh of the 56-year-old politician echoed through the hallway. The skilled eyes of a man who had held power for 20 years swept across the side hall and paused for 1 second at the sight of his daughter and the strange woman blocked by security. Charles Hargrove said nothing. He only lifted one eyebrow, a silent signal heavy with meaning sent to his people. Marcus Vance saw the mayor. Charles Hargrove's stare was like a death sentence to the weak courage that had just begun to rise in the accountant. Vance's face immediately shifted from gray to pale white. He knew exactly how much power the man behind him had, a man who could erase a chief accountant from the financial industry across Georgia with one sentence. Vance trembled and stepped back. He pretended not to hear Camille's call, lowered his head, turned around, and hurried through a small employee passage on the side, vanishing completely behind a red internal velvet curtain. "Mr. Vance!" Camille tried to call one more time, but Miller used his whole body to block her line of sight. "That is enough!" Victoria Hargrove shouted, her patience completely gone after seeing Camille dare cause a scene and call out her family accountant's name in front of her father. "Miller, what are you waiting for? She is clearly a stalker, some crazy person trying to approach officials to cause a disturbance or blackmail us. My father is right there." "Do you want him to handle this himself?" Victoria rushed forward, anger and arrogance blinding the spoiled daughter of wealth. She did not even wait for Miller to act. With a rough movement, Victoria reached out and yanked the plain leather purse hanging from Camille's shoulder. The cheap artificial leather strap could not withstand the sudden pull from Victoria's hand. A dry ripping sound snapped through the air. The strap tore apart, the purse fell onto the marble floor, and the mouth of the bag burst open because the zipper broke. Everything inside scattered across the polished floor. A cheap lip balm, an old Ford car key, and most importantly, a thick stack of documents clipped inside a blue folder stamped in red. These were copies of audit reports, flow charts of the Urban Embrace Fund money trail, and confidential financial documents from the Attorney General's office that Camille had brought to confront Vance. "Look what we have here." Victoria kicked the folder hard with the pointed toe of her silver high heel, sending printed pages full of numbers and financial charts flying across the floor. "Fund records? Where did you get these? Are you a spy from some TV station, or just a cheap blackmailing bitch?" Camille looked at the confidential pages, the work she and her colleagues had spent 3 weeks building, now being stepped on under the heel of an arrogant young woman. The anger inside her had reached its peak, but her face remained cold as ice. She did not argue. She did not scream. Camille slowly bent down, lowering one knee onto the cold marble floor to pick up her papers, holding on to the dignity of a law enforcement officer even in the most humiliating situation. But Victoria did not want to stop there. Camille's silence and grace as she bent to pick up the papers only made the cruelty of the rich young woman explode further. She wanted to see Camille cry, beg, kneel, and admit defeat before the power of the Hargrove name. Just as Camille touched the first sheet, Victoria stepped forward, pressed the heel of her high-heeled shoe down on the back of Camille's hand, and leaned down at the same time. Slap! A sharp, dry, cruel sound rang through the side hall, overpowering the music and laughter from the main room. The blow was so hard it knocked Camille's head sharply to one side. The force of Victoria's hand, along with the hard edges of the diamond rings on her fingers, left a dark red mark stretching from Camille's cheekbone down to the corner of her mouth. A small drop of fresh red blood began to seep from the cut at the corner of Camille's lips, standing out against her dark skin. At the same time, near the edge of the red ribbon separating the main hall, flashbulbs from 3 cameras belonging to local television reporters, who had been following the mayor's auction coverage, began going off rapidly. The camera shutters clicked again and again, capturing the entire moment when the mayor's daughter slapped a black woman kneeling on the floor. Victoria straightened up, her chest rising and falling. Her eyes were full of the satisfaction and madness of someone who had just confirmed her absolute power. She looked down at Camille, who remained on one knee, one hand holding the corner of a torn stack of documents. "Get out of here before I call the police and have people like you thrown in jail." Victoria hissed through her teeth, her voice full of poisonous disgust. "Let's see if anyone in this city of Atlanta dares stand up for a nobody bitch like you against the Hargrove family." The sharp sound of Victoria Hargrove's slap cut through the connection between the reception hall and everything around it like a knife. The entire side hall, filled with some of the most powerful guests in the room, suddenly fell into absolute silence. The polished laughter, the clinking of glasses, and even the deep violin music from the orchestra seemed to be strangled inside an invisible trap. Miller, the intimidating security supervisor, froze in place with both hands suspended in the air. Chloe and Harper, Victoria's 2 close friends, went silent, their mocking smiles frozen on their carefully made-up faces. For those 2 long seconds, no one moved, no whisper. No one stepped out from the circle of expensive clothes to intervene. Atlanta's upper class stood watching, cold and still like wax statues in a museum of indifference. Camille Brooks remained on one knee on the cold marble floor. The stone reflected the brilliant chandelier light, but it also sent a bone-deep chill through the thin fabric of her black dress and into her knee. Her head was still tilted slightly to one side from the force of the blow. Strands of black hair had come loose from the plastic clip and fallen over part of her face. Camille's left cheek burned, an intense heat spreading quickly from her cheekbone down to her chin. The small drop of blood from the cut at the corner of her mouth gathered into a dark red dot before falling and soaking into the corner of the audit sheet she held tightly in her hand. But Camille did not cry. She did not make a single sob, did not scream, and did not show any of the panic people expect from a victim of public violence. She took a deep breath through her nose, her chest expanding, feeling the cool air conditioning ease the burning in her mouth. Slowly and firmly, Camille raised her left hand. With the tip of her index finger, she gently wiped the smeared lipstick from the corner of her mouth and brushed away the fresh blood. She looked at the dark red stain on her fingertip, her face unchanged. Then she used the strength in her legs and slowly stood upright. When Camille stood, she was clearly taller than Victoria. She did not shrink back. Instead, her shoulders squared and her back straightened like a soldier standing before gunfire. She looked straight into Victoria Hargrove's eyes. In Camille's deep black eyes, there was not one trace of fear, not one trace of humiliation, and no hatred from someone wanting violent revenge. The only light in her eyes was a cold, chilling pity. It was the gaze of a judge watching a criminal tie a noose around her own neck while thinking it was a ribbon of honor. Victoria took half a step back, and the satisfied smile on her lips suddenly died. Camille's terrifying calm sent a cold current down the Hargrove daughter's spine. She had wanted to see weakness, a mental collapse, but what she received was silence with absolute pressure. Camille did not say a word to Victoria. She slowly bent down again and picked up the purse with its broken strap. With slow, graceful movements like a dancer finishing the final part of a performance, she gathered each fallen audit page, stacked them neatly, and clipped them tightly inside the confidential blue folder. She stood, looped the broken purse over her arm, and turned to leave. She walked past Miller, who automatically stepped aside without needing a signal. She walked past Chloe and Harper, who stood staring after her. Each of Camille's steps on the marble floor rang in a steady rhythm. She was not running away. She was making a tactical retreat with the full dignity of someone who held the truth. Camera flashes from the reporters kept going off behind her, capturing the straight, lonely back of the black woman leaving the local political elite's temple. Camille pushed through the giant revolving glass door of the Millennium Hotel and stepped into the freezing Atlanta night. The wind moving through the oak trees of Buckhead immediately swallowed the fake sound of the party. She did not wait for a valet to bring her car to the front. She walked down the concrete ramp into the underground parking garage for staff and general guests. The basement level was dark and heavy with the smell of exhaust and damp concrete. Blue-white fluorescent lights flickered overhead now and then, making small buzzing sounds. Camille walked to the end of row G, where her gray 2012 Ford Taurus sedan sat quietly between the large luxury SUVs of VIP guests. She opened the car door, stepped inside, and shut it hard. The door struck the metal frame with a dull thud, cutting off the glittering upper-class world above her. Camille sat still behind the wheel. She did not hurry to put the key in the ignition. The silence inside the car felt alive. She raised her hand and touched her left cheek. The skin around her cheekbone had already swollen, and tiny blood vessels beneath the surface felt tight. When her finger touched the cut at the corner of her mouth, a sharp pain shot up to her temple, forcing her to close her eyes tightly for a few seconds. Camille turned the key. The old V6 engine shuddered awake, louder than normal because the muffler had aged badly over time. The heater in the center console began to hiss in waves, blowing out air that smelled of dust and old plastic before true warmth arrived. She turned on the small yellow dome light in the ceiling of the car. The weak light fell down onto the blue case file resting on the passenger seat. Camille reached over, took the folder, and opened the large clip. On top was a photograph of an elementary school in South Atlanta, a place less than 20 miles from Buckhead, but like another world completely. The photo showed a classroom with peeling walls, a ceiling stained by rainwater, and pressed wood desks rotting at the corners. This was the school that was supposed to be repaired with $1.2 million from the Urban Embrace Fund at the beginning of last year. Camille turned to the next page. It was the financial report for Hargrove & Sons Construction, a legal entity registered under the name of the mayor's cousin. The page showed 3 payments, each for $400,000, labeled site survey and technical consulting costs. Not a single brick had been bought. Not one worker had appeared at that school. That money had turned into entertainment expenses, lobbying dinners at golf clubs, and hidden contributions to Charles Hargrove's campaign to keep his seat. Looking at those numbers, Camille's memory suddenly pulled her back 15 years to a flickering office outside Savannah. Her father, Arthur Brooks, a black man with rough hands covered in calluses from mechanic work, had stood before a city council made entirely of men in expensive suits. They had used an urban planning decision passed during a closed midnight meeting to seize her family's entire mechanic shop and turn it into part of a parking lot expansion for a new shopping center. Back then, her father had tried to explain that it was his family's only livelihood, the place where he had worked 14 hours a day for 20 years to put Camille through school. But the local political system operated with cruelty. There was no fair compensation. No lawyer wanted to take on a case against the city council for a small fee. Camille never forgot the image of her father sitting at the kitchen table in their small home, his trembling hands holding the eviction order, his eyes staring into empty space with the helplessness of a man stripped of his dignity and property and unable to do anything about it. He died 2 years later from a heart attack, carrying with him a broken belief in a fair society. The old wound in her family never healed. It only turned into a cold block of ice deep inside Camille's chest, pushing her to take the financial auditing exam for the State Department of Justice. She understood that to confront families like the Hargroves, violence or shouting in the streets had no value. The only weapons that could crush their fortress were numbers, bank records, and laws enforced with precise, cold accuracy. Camille closed the file. The anger from Victoria's slap was no longer a personal issue. It had become the perfect legal catalyst. Throughout the investigation, the Attorney General's office had been blocked by administrative procedures. Charles Hargrove was a sitting mayor, and he had legal privileges that could delay search warrants for the fund's office for 30 days under the excuse of internal review. 30 days was more than enough time for a seasoned politician to destroy every hard drive containing original accounting data and legitimize the Cayman accounts. But Georgia law was very clear. If there was assault, battery, or obstruction against a public officer carrying out a confidential investigation, the state justice agency had the right to activate the emergency intervention for national security or witness protection procedure. Victoria Hargrove's slap, witnessed by the media and the hotel security cameras, was the golden key that allowed Camille to bypass the normal county court approval process. Victoria thought she had used power to humiliate a nobody. In reality, she had personally handed the Department of Justice an undeniable legal reason to raid her father's office that very night. Camille reached into the inside pocket of her wool coat and pulled out a second phone. It was an old BlackBerry satellite phone with a scratched black plastic shell, no touchscreen, only a physical keyboard and a top security encryption chip connected directly to the internal network of the Georgia Attorney General's office. She unlocked it, her thumb stopping on number 1, the speed dial that led directly to the busy line of the Attorney General at the time, Thomas Sterling. The heater in the Ford Taurus kept hissing steadily, pressing warm air against Camille's swollen face. Outside, the underground garage remained still, dark and lonely. Camille lifted the phone to eye level, blue light from the small screen reflected in her black, cold, determined eyes. She pressed call. The first long tone sounded through the encrypted speaker system, breaking the final silence inside the car. The second long tone had not finished before the line connected. There was no polite greeting, no complicated administrative procedure. There was only a low, rough voice carrying the invisible sharpness of a man who had spent his life running the scales of law in Georgia. Thomas Sterling, the state attorney general, was sitting in his central office, surrounded by digital money flow monitoring screens and 3 special teams waiting for orders. Camille Brooks leaned back against the worn leather seat of the Ford Taurus. She did not raise a hand to touch the swelling on her left cheek, but every time she moved her lips, sharp pain ran along the muscles, reminding her of the seriousness of what had just happened upstairs. "Attorney General, this is Special Agent Brooks," Camille said, her voice low, each word carrying the weight of a complete legal indictment. "Target Charles Hargrove has confirmed tolerance and cover-up behavior at the scene. Marcus Vance showed signs of wanting to cooperate but was immediately isolated by the mayor's security team. More importantly, his family just gave us an undeniable legal reason for emergency intervention due to assault on a public officer carrying out a confidential assignment." The other end went silent for 1 second. Camille heard papers turning through the speaker along with the rapid typing of a legal secretary on a mechanical keyboard. Thomas Sterling did not ask Camille if she was okay. He did not need unnecessary sympathy. As a politician and head of the state justice agency, he instantly understood the value of the blood on Camille's lip. It was a master key. "The assault happened in public, Special Agent Brooks?" Sterling asked, his voice cold as a scanner. "In front of at least 20 Buckhead upper-class witnesses, the Millennium Hotel security cameras, and 3 local television news lenses," Camille answered, looking at the flickering fluorescent light on the garage ceiling. "Victoria Hargrove directly grabbed my purse, broke the seal on confidential Justice Department documents, and committed physical violence against me while I was recovering evidence." "Good," Sterling replied, one short word full of decision. "The emergency intervention order under Section 16 of the Georgia Criminal Code is being electronically signed." The Fulton County judge has approved an emergency search warrant for the entire Urban Embrace office and a temporary asset freeze on the Hargrove Re-election Committee based on risk of evidence destruction. I am on my way to your location with the State Patrol. In 20 minutes, we end this night. The signal cut off. Camille lowered the phone and placed it in the storage compartment beside the steering wheel. She adjusted the rearview mirror and looked at her own reflection under the dim dome light. Victoria's slap had turned purple-red, clearly showing the shape of the expensive diamond rings. The cut at the corner of her mouth had stopped bleeding, but the skin around it had dried into a dark mark. Camille lightly adjusted the collar of her black wool coat, opened the car door, and stepped out. She was no longer hiding in the dark. She walked toward the elevator leading straight back up to the hotel's main hall. Meanwhile, on the second floor of the Millennium Hotel, the charity gala had reached the height of luxury and self-satisfaction. The center stage was decorated with thousands of white orchids imported from South America, giving off a sweet scent that completely overpowered the earlier tension in the side hall. The violin music had been replaced by the victorious sound of a brass ensemble. Mayor Charles Hargrove stood at the center of the stage. His perfectly tailored tailcoat suit enhanced the solid shape of a man used to standing before cameras. He lifted his chest proudly as he looked at the giant electronic board behind him, where the donation total for the evening had just jumped to $5.6 million. Sharp applause rose from the VIP tables below. Men in tuxedos and women covered in diamonds stood and raised glasses to the man they believed would protect their economic interests in the city for another term. Victoria Hargrove sat at the honor table just below the stage, holding a glass of red wine, her face bright with a victorious smile. She had just received praise from her friends for the way she had handled the strange woman in the hallway. To her, that slap had been a declaration of power, a practical lesson for anyone from the lower class who dared step into the mayor's family territory. She had no idea that the slap was becoming a legal storm racing toward the hotel at the speed of police vehicles. Just as the number on the electronic board was about to rise again, the loud sound of engines and tires grinding against the concrete ramp erupted from the glass doors in the first-floor lobby, breaking the perfection of the brass music. 4 large black Chevrolet Tahoe SUVs from the Georgia State Patrol rushed straight into the hotel's guest entrance area. The vehicles did not use sirens, but red and blue lights hidden behind the front grills and on the windshields swept across the hotel's glass walls, creating cold flashes that announced the arrival of the state's highest legal authority. The doors flew open. 12 investigators wearing dark navy windbreakers stamped with large reflective yellow letters reading "Adj Investigator" stepped out. Handguns rested at their sides and hard plastic cases containing electronic data backup devices were in their hands. Leading them was Thomas Sterling. The attorney walked with long strides, his ash-gray overcoat moving lightly in the wind. His square face was serious and carried no diplomatic expression. And walking right beside him, half a step behind in the proper position of a senior special agent guiding the way, was Camille Brooks. Camille had changed. The plain black dress from earlier was now covered by the official jacket of the State Department of Justice. A gold 7-point star badge engraved with the number 0412 shone on her chest, reflecting the camera flashes from confused reporters near the door. Her cheek was still swollen and red, and the cut at the corner of her mouth was still clear under the bright lobby lights, but her eyes burned with the cold light of a person holding legal life and death power over the Hargrove empire. The hotel security staff, including Miller, immediately froze where they stood. When Miller saw the badge on Camille's chest and Attorney General Sterling's face, he understood that all the internal hotel rules and the mayor's name he had used to threaten Camille earlier were now worthless scraps of paper. He stepped backward, hands hanging at his sides, head lowered to the floor to avoid Camille's eyes as she walked past. The investigators entered the main hall and pushed open the 2 oak doors leading into the central reception room. The sudden arrival of armed officials and government agents made the brass music on stage die at once. Wealthy guests turned their heads, shot clear on faces that had been full of diplomatic smiles only moments before. Mayor Charles Hargrove stood on stage, his smile freezing the moment he saw Thomas Sterling enter. As a longtime political operator, Hargrove knew the structure of power very well. A state attorney general never appeared at a local charity gala with an armed investigation team unless they had come to execute an arrest warrant or a seizure order. Hargrove's eyes swept quickly over the group and stopped on Camille Brooks. When he saw the gold badge on her chest and the injury his daughter had caused, the mayor's fat, healthy-looking face shifted from rosy red to ash gray. He understood immediately. The trap had snapped shut, and the one who pulled the trigger was his own arrogant daughter. Thomas Sterling did not walk onto the stage. He stopped in the center aisle between the banquet tables and pulled a sealed set of documents from his coat pocket, stamped with the raised seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. Mayor Hargrove. Sterling's voice sounded through the organizer's wireless microphone, which one of the agents had just taken from a technician. His voice was low, clear, and carried through the 500-square-meter room. "I am Thomas Sterling, Attorney General of the state of Georgia. I am here to execute emergency search warrant number 908 and a temporary asset freeze order against all accounts connected to the Urban Embrace Fund and your re-election committee, approved by a Fulton County judge 15 minutes ago." The room exploded into frantic whispers like a disturbed beehive. Wineglasses trembled in the hands of elegant women. Several people immediately stepped back to avoid being caught in the press cameras. "Sterling, what do you think you're doing?" Charles Hargrove tried to hold on to the last bit of authority. He stepped down from the stage, his hand shaking as they gripped the front of his suit. "This is a legal charity event. You cannot bring armed people in here and cause chaos based on baseless accusations. Baseless accusations, mister." Mayor, Camille Brooks stepped forward and stood level with the Attorney General. She opened the digital recorder in her hand and pressed play. Marcus Vance's trembling voice rang through the central speakers. "I don't want to be involved with the $4.2 million in Cayman anymore." All of it went through the re-election committee's shell accounts. And more importantly, Camille looked straight at Hargrove's sweating face, her voice cold as a razor. "Your daughter, Victoria Hargrove, just committed criminal assault against a senior state special agent carrying out a confidential investigation with the purpose of destroying financial evidence. Under Section 16 of the Georgia Criminal Code, this conduct allows us to activate emergency intervention without waiting through the mayor's office 30-day review period. At the honor table, Victoria Hargrove could not take it anymore. Her extreme arrogance and total ignorance of the law pushed her into hysteria. She jumped to her feet, knocking the velvet chair behind her, and rushed toward Camille and Attorney General Sterling. "Shut your mouths," Victoria screamed, her beautiful face twisted by anger and fear. "Do you know who my father is? He is the mayor of this city. And you," she pointed her dark red fingernail at Camille's face. "You're just a nobody bitch in cheap clothes. Who let you bring that fake badge in here to slander my family?" "Security, throw them out." Thomas Sterling did not blink at Victoria's outburst. He turned toward two uniformed investigators behind him and gave a slight nod. "We know exactly who your father is, Ms. Hargrove," Sterling answered coldly, his voice perfectly still. "And we also know that you personally drove the final nail into his political career. 20 minutes ago, you assaulted a senior state special agent on a confidential assignment. That act constitutes a third-degree felony under Georgia law." Sterling turned to Charles Hargrove, who now stood frozen in the aisle, his eyes empty with helplessness. "Start with Victoria Hargrove for assaulting a public officer and destroying confidential evidence. Then Charles Hargrove for unlawful enrichment, embezzlement of public funds, and manipulation of public financial markets. No, let me go." "You have no right," Victoria screamed, as two federal investigators stepped forward and locked her hands behind her back with stainless steel cuffs. The crisp click of the metal cuffs ended the era of Hargrove privilege completely. Her glittering silver mermaid gown was pulled to one side as she struggled, and her dark red nails clawed uselessly at the navy windbreakers of the agents. At the same time, two other investigators moved toward Charles Hargrove. The mayor did not struggle. He knew everything was over. Camille's audit report, combined with his daughter's stupid act of violence, had created a perfect legal file that even the most expensive lawyers in Atlanta could not defend against. He slowly held out his hands and let the metal cuffs close around his wrists. Flashes from local television cameras went off non-stop, capturing the full scene of the Hargrove father and daughter, who only minutes earlier had been the center of respect and power, now being escorted down the central aisle of the banquet hall between rows of shocked, silent elite guests. Camille Brooks stood at the edge of the aisle. She watched Victoria and Charles Hargrove being pushed toward the hotel's revolving glass door. Her left cheek still throbbed, but inside her the cold block of ice she had carried for 15 years seemed to be melting, giving way to a quiet, relieved, victorious feeling that belonged to someone who had used the truth itself to enforce justice. She did not need an apology from Victoria. The sentence that young woman would soon face in state court would be the apology with the most value for Camille's dignity and her father's memory. Thomas Sterling walked over to Camille and looked at the wound on her face. "Special Agent Brooks, do you need to go to the hospital before returning to the office?" Camille looked at the Attorney General and shook her head lightly. A real smile, gentle and steady, appeared on her lips, though it made the corner of her mouth sting. "No, Attorney General," Camille answered, her voice level but full of strength. "I need to go back to the office. We still have $4.2 million to seize from shell accounts and return to the schools on the south side by Monday morning." She turned and walked slowly and confidently with the investigation team toward the main entrance. Outside, the black SUVs already had their doors open. Red and blue lights swept through the Buckhead night, lighting the road toward downtown, where truth and law were waiting to be carried out in full. The blue neon light of the Georgia Department of Justice office cast long streaks across the pressed wood desk with peeling corners. On the old Panasonic television mounted in the corner of the room, a Fox 5 Atlanta anchor was reading the morning news in a steady, professional tone. but the information being delivered could shake the entire local political machine. The image of Charles Hargrove walking with his hands locked in front of him, head lowered to avoid reporters' microphones, repeated again and again on screen. Beside it was footage of Victoria Hargrove, her expensive mermaid gown from last night now wrinkled, her makeup faded, her face partly blocked by the hands of escorting officers as they pushed her into the back seat of a patrol SUV. The coffee maker in the corner clicked and sputtered, filling the room with the slightly burned smell of cheap Arabica beans that had sat too long in the container. Camille Brooks stood beside the water counter, 2 fingers lightly gripping a white ceramic mug printed with the faded logo of the audit office. Each time she looked up at the screen, the muscles around her left cheek twitched, a dull tightness still clear beneath the flesh-colored bandage running along her cheekbone. The real aftermath of last night did not unfold like a Hollywood action movie with explosions. It moved like a chain reaction inside the American financial system. By 6 in the morning, 3 of the largest real estate corporations in Midtown, entities that had signed sponsorship commitments totaling $2.4 million for Urban Embrace, had all released official press statements. Their lawyers announced the cancellation of all partnership terms, citing reputational ethics incidents to immediately withdraw funds in an attempt to save stock prices that had begun sliding on the New York Exchange. The loyalty of Buckhead Capital always had an exact limit, and that limit ended the moment handcuffs touched the wrists of the Hargrove father and daughter. The glass door to the main office opened softly with the light squeak of old rubber seals. Attorney General Thomas Sterling stepped inside, carrying a thick file with a yellow tag, the sign of a case that had finished transfer procedures to the federal prosecutor's office. He placed the file on the desk, pulled a swivel chair closer, sat down, and loosened his navy tie slightly. Marcus Vance signed the plea agreement at 4:30 this morning, Sterling said. His voice was rough after a sleepless night, but he could not hide the relief in it. He accepted a reduced sentence of 5 years in federal prison in exchange for providing all access codes to the backup server system stored at his private home in Savannah. The digital team recovered more than 3,000 pages of hidden transfer records between Indigo and Hargrove's personal accounts. Camille set the coffee mug down on the desk, the ceramic touching the wood with a small knock. And the $4.2 million. The Fulton County Court just issued an emergency order transferring full control of the frozen account balances to the State Board of Education, Sterling said, tapping a finger lightly on the file. They will set up an independent oversight board to release funds directly for school renovation projects in South Atlanta. No survey costs, no Hargrove subcontractors. Everything begins early next month. Camille looked at the court order with the judge's signature and the red raised seal at the bottom corner of the page. The number $4.2 million, which had only been dry characters on her computer screen for 3 weeks, had now become something physical. Roofs that would no longer leak when the rainy season came, labs with enough equipment, and children on the south side no longer forced to sit at rotting desks. Sterling stood, buttoned his suit jacket again, and looked at the wound on Camille's face. The judge wants you present at the first hearing on Thursday morning to complete the report on Victoria's assault. Do you want to take a few days off before then, Special Agent Brooks? I'm fine, Attorney General, Camille said with a small shake of her head, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. New DeKalb County files landed on my desk at 7 this morning. Work doesn't stop because of one slap. Sterling nodded, a nod full of respect for the subordinate who had used her own dignity to break a local political empire. He walked out, leaving the room to return to the familiar quiet of an ordinary workday. Camille walked toward the large glass door leading to the small balcony of the 4th-floor office. She pushed it open and stepped outside. The Atlanta morning air entered her chest, carrying the slight chill of late spring and the damp smell of asphalt from the streets below. From this spot, she could see the whole city waking under the early sunlight. Cars moved in long lines of light along Interstate 85, and the distant rumble of engines rose like the steady heartbeat of a huge machine. Farther away, the glass and steel skyscrapers of downtown glittered under the sunrise. They looked solid and grand, but Camille knew better than anyone that beneath those shiny shells, ordinary people kept them running through the rules of truth. She rested, both hands on the black iron balcony rail, and looked at the oak trees budding in the park across the street. The morning wind moved through her hair and cooled the wound still burning faintly on her cheek. In that quiet space, Camille's inner voice rose, a low reflection not about a dramatic victory, but about healing a wound that had lasted 15 years since the day her father died in helplessness. Camille raised her hand and gently peeled the bandage from her left cheek. The skin underneath had begun to tighten, leaving behind a faint pale mark, the trace of the final action night, but also a symbol of release. She smiled softly as she thought about the school in South Atlanta. Next week, trucks carrying building materials would arrive, and those children would have a safe place to learn, just as her father had once wanted for her when he still ran his mechanic shop in Savannah. Justice could not bring her father back, but it could make sure that honest men like him would not keep being stripped of everything in silence forever. Camille returned to the office and closed the balcony door, shutting out the city noise completely. She walked to her desk and opened the small bottom drawer. Inside was her old leather purse, its broken strap crudely stitched back together with thick black thread during the night. She picked up the gold 7-point-star investigator badge and looked at it one last time under the fluorescent light. The badge was not just a work tool. It was the anchor that kept her tied to reality, reminding her why she had chosen this path. Camille placed the badge inside the inner zipper pocket of the purse and carefully closed it. She turned off the desk lamp, cleaned up the empty coffee mug, and pulled the black wool coat over her shoulders. Camille stepped out of the office and headed toward the elevator to begin a new day of auditing in DeKalb County. When the elevator doors closed, the image of the plainly dressed black woman disappeared behind polished metal, leaving a quiet space inside the Department of Justice office. The story of the Hargrove family would soon become a file in the state archive, but it left behind an open question, a living silence for anyone who had ever stood in the hallway of injustice. Is silence before the slaps of privilege a safe choice, or is that very silence what feeds the next fortress of tyranny and lets it keep standing? Outside, the city of Atlanta kept moving, cars kept flowing, and the answer belonged to the ordinary people walking its sidewalks every day.